And we're recording.
Well, good evening, and thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share with you something I am so passionate about, the CubeSat. In particular, I'd like to share with you what I have been able to do with my colleagues in the last 5 years with middle school students in developing real satellites and putting them into space. So the title of my talk tonight is Blue Sky Learning. And you're going to learn a little bit about my philosophy. I'm very pleased to hear that there's some students and educators here as well. And again, thank you. First thing I want to say, if you just look at this cover page, this is a photograph taken by a shuttle of Florida from space. I'm located in South Florida, but what I really want you to see is the artwork, because most of this artwork was done by students that were on teams building either CubeSats, high altitude balloons, or building a rover that they hope to put on the moon one day. So what I'd like you to know first and foremost, if you're in education, is that aerospace has there is a place for every student with every type of interest in aerospace. If you're a historian, if you're an artist, I had a student that wrote a historical paper about art in the Middle East, and he presented it at the International Astronautical Congress last fall. So space is so inspiring, and I'm just glad to share with you. Okay, first of all, I'm here to discuss with you what is a CubeSat. And the CubeSat, as you may know, is a miniaturized spacecraft. Now, these CubeSats are built on a form factor of 10 centimeters on a side, approximately 1.33 kilograms. That's called 1 unit. Today, more satellites are being launched in the 3U variety, so they're about the size of a loaf of bread. The factors that have made the CubeSat so transformational, as far as I'm concerned with education, is that they can be done now. Students as young as 12 years old can build these, and there is a pathway where they can see them launched into space. These satellites definitely have benefited from the revolution of all the MEMS and all the technologies associated with the smartphones. And so with the miniaturization of electronics and better access to space, now what was once a project or a program that only nations could accomplish, launching things into space, can now be done by middle schools. So as you probably know, Bob Twiggs and Professor Jordy at Stanford and Cal Poly, they were looking for a way to train grad students in the time that they had them to design, build, test, and fly a satellite. And as you'd imagine, these are often decadal missions, or even multi-decadal missions, from the time a large satellite is designed until the end of its life. So Bob Twiggs says, I'm sitting around holding a Beanie Baby box one day for one of my daughter's toys, wondering what could I fit into this small volume. And by using such a small volume, he recognized he was de-scoping and limiting the functionality and some of the capabilities of the spacecraft, and forcing the students to work within those weight, power, and size constraints. And that's exactly one of the best selling points for these. I think they're the most disruptive tool in engineering and education. And the first time I learned about it was 2009. I had visited the University of Florida, and they were building SwampSat 1. And I thought, if these university kids could do it, what could high school or even middle school kids do? So it took me about 10 years, almost 10 years, to go from what is a CubeSat to putting one up. So I also employ something called Blue Sky Learning with my students. Young students are so excited about aerospace and space in general. They do not, and they have such enthusiasm, they do not know why they should not be able to build a satellite. So when I left the National Science Foundation, I was looking for a school that would be willing to let me take a shot and build one of these. And these are the pioneer, the founding class for our first satellite. And the oldest ones in this picture are now seniors. They were 7th and 6th graders when we started. And they had no idea how to build a satellite. Frankly, I didn't either, but we were going to go to the Smallsack Conference and we were going to figure it out. And they decided they wanted to fly a biological mission. So as you'd imagine, CubeSats can have any mission that a larger spacecraft could have, but they primarily fall into certain categories. As you would imagine, remote sensing, one of the most common missions. You're either taking images of the surface of the Earth, you're investigating the atmosphere of the Earth, or even astronomy. Today, most satellites, though, are communication satellites. That's where most of the money is made in space, with communications. And also, there are two other types of payloads I'd like to describe to you. One is a technology demonstration. So one of the advantages of the CubeSat is that you can fly. It is much better to test a new piece of hardware, a new component on a much lower cost satellite, say a $200,000 satellite, than a $100 million or $50 million satellite. And so you can validate technologies. And my favorite missions, I'm a biochemist by schooling, so I enjoy the biological payloads. So these spacecraft have every subsystem that the ISS would have except ECLSS. You have attitude determination, attitude control, you have power, you have processors, you have thermal control, you have a payload, some mission, the reason you're going to space. So everything you want to do in a large spacecraft, we do with the CubeSats. So again, young students, we started in 2015 and we purposed to build a CubeSat. And now I would like to share just a moment or two about the blue sky learning. So I truly believe that the CubeSat is a tool by which we can get our next generation for the STEM workforce ready. Also, the CubeSat is very real world. It's very authentic. It's definitely a team sport. I've coached many teams, and I think some of my most enjoyable team experiences have been with the CubeSat and not on the athletic fields. And this is a way we can fill the STEM pipeline. So I have a colleague, and Ms. Delutri definitely knows who she is, Shauna Christensen, and together we are actually a partner. Now, Shauna Christensen teaches debate and public speaking at my school, and I teach aerospace and physics, chemistry, biology. But together we have created something we call the talkies and the techies. I think you guys would agree. The joke is that engineers in general are not great communicators. And so what we've done is we've purposed to not only try to help these kids be as technically savvy as they can be, but be very persuasive communicators. And so we accomplish that by a number of things. One, they are quick to speak in public, from City Hall to the White House. These satellite kids, actually, the middle school kids actually spoke at the Office of Science and Technology Policy a couple of years ago. So not being afraid to speak in front of a large audience or subject matter experts, they present at NASA headquarters, it does not matter. To them, it's just the culmination of their practice. So we try to demystify all of the, how do I speak convincingly? How do I persuade others? But we feel like that, in addition to doing some really interesting work, makes them very competitive as they move to the next level in their life. And I'll spend just a little bit of time here. I like to employ some of these subjects. I really believe in the growth mindset versus, say, a fixed mindset, and that is blue sky learning. We teach the kids that space is hard, and failing at the highest possible level is the best that you can hope for. The joke was, if you built your spacecraft and NASA chose you and it was on the rocket and the rocket blew up on the pad, you still checked every box to get to space. It wasn't your call, or you were not responsible for the rocket. So we would definitely embrace a growth mindset. I love co-opetition. So every year I challenge the kids to come up with ideas for future payloads, and they compete against each other for the best idea. But at the same time, they're also collaborating. So the goal is always that our Wolverines or our Wolfpack CubeSat teams are trying to be selected by NASA. So we'll submit a number of projects, and when one is selected by NASA, then everybody becomes members of that team. So we are both collaborative and competing. So here you can see some of the early students. I went with the University of Florida has a small satellite design club and a capstone project where they build a CubeSat emulator for a high altitude balloon. So I followed sort of their model, and we came up with our missions. These students that you see here, they came up with the plan. And we were intending to launch a CubeSat within 3 years, and I think it took us 39 months. So they were very successful. In their hands, you can see these 1U emulators. These emulators we could put on the tethered balloons, which you can see here. And we would use Wi-Fi, Raspberry Pi, a MEM sensor board, and then they would communicate to the tethered balloon and send down pictures and sensor data and video clips. That was the way they got started. So it was very incremental. We used hardware on the ground. It's always fun when young kids learn how to solder because they're going to get burned. It's going to happen, engineering accidents. But we used emulators, we used 3D printers, we did the tethered balloon. Then we moved to, we did a captive carry flight with Generation Orbit, this yellow and blue emulator. You can see they 3D printed, they built it. We flew it inside a jammer pod on a Learjet with Generation Orbit that did some high G acrobatic turns. And that was memorable because these young kids had to go through a final flight review with the Generation Orbit engineers, and that was terrifying to them. But they did it, and then by the time they got to fly their satellite, it became much easier. So incrementally, we started with the groundwork, then tethered balloons, then high altitude balloons, a captive carry flight, and then we, applied to NASA and were very privileged to be selected. One of the best things about the high altitude balloon is that the system I like to use employs the Global Star network. So we get our telemetry packets from Global Star, and the dashboard that we get from the Global Star satellite network is very similar to the radio we use with Global Star for our CubeSat. So everything we do, everything I do with the kids, I'm trying to emulate and help them move from the very simple and get more and more complex and more like going to space. So here you can see our very first high altitude balloon. We hoped to hit 100,000 feet. We didn't quite get it. But we had some nice images of the western edge of the Bahamas from our 900 megahertz camera. And then we also had the telemetry packets through Global Star. Interesting, we've done 3 or 4 high altitude balloons. The second one only went half as high. We had some high winds and sheared the nozzle of our balloon, we think. Our third high altitude balloon ended up in the trees and never made it above 40 feet because we grossly underestimated the amount of helium we'd need for a much heavier payload that had a buoy. And then our fourth high altitude balloon was just last December. We hit over 100,000 feet, and our balloon was really oversized for our payload. And we had a buoy such that when the balloon burst and it hit the water, it would float up and down in the water and give us some accelerometer data until the batteries died. And we made it 3,600 miles due east of the school out towards Morocco. That was we were so, the kids are just excited because as long as I share the login credentials, they can see all of the balloon data. They can see the ascent rate, and I'm going to skip ahead to the data. This is sort of what the dashboard looks like for the high altitude balloon as well as our satellite. So the kids are just so excited. They just sit and watch the balloon data. We get a telemetry flag every 30 seconds, and that helps them prepare for the satellite. So I went to the Smallsack Conference, and I really interviewed and tried to meet with the suppliers to find a company with some heritage that could help us, but wasn't so big that we would just be a customer to them and they wouldn't help train us. And we ended up going with Near Space Launch as our primary supplier for bus components. And then we worked with a company up in the Titusville area for our payload. Now our students decide to fly an extremophile bacteria they had read about. Our intention was to validate a lab on a chip, and we were selected in 2017 by NASA. So here you can see some of the students working. These are 5th graders and 7th graders. We used our bus. We had a very small, we had limitations as far as the size of the data packets we could receive because we were using the Global Star Network and definitely the hexadecimal format. So the kids enjoyed watching The Martian. And here is an engineering unit with the young ladies in the bottom frame. And the engineering unit would talk to Global Star. The young lady that's closest to you, just over her hand, is a patch antenna. And if you sat close enough to the windows, it could definitely talk to Global Star. And that's how we could test our payloads. Here was a schematic of our payload. We basically had read a paper, an astrobiology paper, that these dirty comets might seed planets with life. So we took an extremophile bacteria that had been found in an ice core, and it was thousands of years old, still viable. And we say, okay, we'll lyophilize the bacteria, we'll put it in space, then we'll hydrate it. And then we used a stain, a live dead stain. So if the cells are still intact, when the blue diode light hits them, they'll fluoresce green. And then if the cell has lysed open and if it's burst, then it will fluoresce red. So we had a live dead stain, and we were looking at a ratio of the light. So here is, honestly, I don't know if these students will ever have as good a time as we all had integrating. And finally, when the time comes and we make it through all of the validation and verification requirements that NASA required, our integrator assigned to us by NASA was Spaceflight Industries. So we flew to Seattle, and these 6 students went through the checkout, and they integrated the CubeSat into a deployer just in front of a 2U CubeSat from Spain. And incredible time. We did vibration and thermal bakeout at Kennedy Space Center. We did all the other tests on our own, and the young lady and the young man in the upper right corner, they were the last humans to touch it. Actually, that young lady, she'll be my heart surgeon one day when she gets out of medical school. We've already worked out a deal that I get free medical care for life from her. And wonderful kids, really impressive. They were all middle school. So we finally launched after several delays from Vandenberg into a sun-sync orbit at an apogee of 575 kilometers. It was pretty circularized. This photo was the closest they would let me get to the launch pad the night before and take a photo. One of my 8th graders designed this mission patch, which became our coin. So again, always a home for all the students. And we collected data for about 18 months, but once our radio license expired from the FCC, we send up a signal, and the kill switch turns off and powers down our CubeSat. So while our experiment was designed to last a few weeks, we've collected heartbeat and telemetry data on our CubeSat for over a year and a half. So with all of that excitement, now every year I have students that apply, and we were selected in the 10th round. This in the bottom right corner, this is our school, the Y school. But this time it wasn't the school that was applying, it was my Wolverine CubeSat team. So as students come and move on, we create new identities. Now it was just a CubeSat team, not the school necessarily, but we are now building our second CubeSat, which should launch this November. The CapSat-1 is definitely a technology demonstration. The goal is to fly basically a dead CubeSat with capacitors and then charge it on orbit in sunlight with the solar panels and see if we're able to do anything meaningful with a payload of basically these Maxwell capacitors. So this was a 7th grader's idea. So he came up with the idea, and whenever a student has, we sort of judge them, and whomever comes up with the best idea, they become the co-investigator for a full NASA proposal. So we end up with 60 to 80 page proposals from these middle school kids because they're so excited to put their name on something. And frankly, the kids that design the patches get pretty excited as well. With this satellite, our goal with the first one was to be the first middle school to launch a CubeSat. With our second satellite, it was to see how much better we could do, what a good job we could do. And we use a lot of the NASA documents. And so our rule is we'll be ready to hand off our satellite 2 years to the day after NASA selects us. So you can see we try to follow the general life cycle, engineering life cycle as NASA is described in the NASA Systems Engineering Handbook. So this is one of the dry erase boards in my room, and we're getting close to our second. My older students have since decided, hey, let's build a CubeSat, and let's build a Lunar Rover based on the principles of our CubeSat, put a drivetrain and some locomotion in it, and let's study the impact of dust, the mitigation of dust on solar panels and whatnot on the surface of the moon. So they've been to Astrobotic, and we would love to catch a ride with them, but this is at least 10 times more expensive than our CubeSats, and it's taken a lot longer. So it's like all the other real world space programs, over budget and delayed. But we're still enthusiastic about it. So now that we've been picked a couple of times, this year we're submitting only 3 proposals. And the Wolfpack is our current iteration, and I'm going to be with the Wolfpack for a while. What we decided we would do is look at what NASA's strategic aims or what they're trying to accomplish. And so what we found is that NASA wants to fly a CubeSat from all 50 states. And I have contacts in North Carolina. That's where I'm from. And we had a gentleman that met our kids in Michigan from Nebraska. And what we ended up doing was mentoring middle and high school students in both Nebraska and North Carolina. And we helped them create their own CubeSat teams. And so we felt like this would help us with our proposal, and our kids, we're at a place where they want to give back. And so Nebraska, we're partnering with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and they have a group of middle school kids that they're actively training. And then in North Carolina, we work very closely with a Title I public high school. And we all met at Kennedy Space Center in October and conducted our preliminary design review. We think we have a pretty good chance of being selected because we all have our own primary missions. Nebraska kids are looking at some really novel solar panels. The North Carolina kids are looking at an aerogel and looking at collisions and impacts in their gel. But we all have a secondary mission where we're going to share packets through our second radio, through our kill switch radio. And so hopefully Florida's CubeSat Wolfpack will send some packets down from North Carolina and Nebraska. And our goal is to be deployed out of a tube at the same time from either the ISS or a free flyer. And as we drift apart, as we orbit around the Earth, we want to investigate how well we can share data through our second radios. And I know I'm about out of time, so I have a couple more slides. I'm cognizant of my 25-minute limit. Stephen, would you like me to pause
here? You keep going. It's fine. The audience will drop off when they can't take any more.
Okay. Well,
How about that? So keep going.
Sure. I have less than 5 minutes. I have just a couple more slides. Except I forgot where my share button is. Let's see. Thank you guys for giving me just a couple more minutes. I wanted to share and brag a little bit about our experiences with the National Space Society and some of our other activities related to aerospace. So we submit proposals in the late fall to NASA, and then we don't hear back for several months. So what we work on are space settlement designs in the interim. And Ms. Delutri, I remember her and Lynn Zielinski in Los Angeles in 2018. We had finished second that year with a design, and we had worked with students from Peru and Chile. The Chilean kids, and we enter as one team for the space settlement contest. Our Chilean kids, they're just too poor to travel, but the Peruvian kids met my kids in Los Angeles. And so the upper photo here are the Peruvian and American students that we presented at the ISDC in 2018. And then last fall, a lot of my CubeSat kids decided we would enter this competition through the Space Foundation, and they were U.S. champs, and we represented the United States in Beijing, China. And man, you talk about eye-opening. 12 American kids and about 275 Chinese kids competing against one another. That was eye-opening. I don't have time to tell you all the stories there, but there are a bunch. And then I'm very pleased. We did not place at all in 2019 in the Space Settlement Contest, but the kid that led the team worked so hard and did such a good job. I asked him would he lead the team his final 8th grade year. He did. And that's the only year my students have been first place in the Space Settlement Design Competition. So to say they were proud of that is understatement. Okay, Smallsat. If you are interested in building CubeSats and learning about it, please go to the Smallsack Conference. It's the largest conference for these small class of satellites. My students presented in 2018, and then we've been entering the university poster competition the last couple of years. So you can see their work there. Again, little kids don't know why they shouldn't be able to run with the big dogs, these college kids. And so we just have a really good time with that. And finally, we submitted our final report to NASA. Every student that wanted to could contribute, and they were listed as a co-author. It ended up being about 100 pages. We had numerous publications, and we presented all over the world, and so just privileged and glad to be able to do it. And then my colleague and I, Shauna, we do quite a bit of aerospace, and I just wanted to show you, we started mapping out the age of the students we work with and the academic rigor or the complexity of what we do. And we've been trying to make a pitch to some other aerospace organizations about how do we mentor kids at any age, but at a higher level of rigor. And building a real satellite, I think, is about as good as it gets. And I just want to share with you, I love these kids. They get to drive the train. It's really about how hard they want to work. They've done really well. Very proud of them. We just want to keep building satellites. I would be glad to work with any of you that want to connect me with students or others that would like to do the same. And I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate it. I tried not to go too far over. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much for that enlightening presentation. Jim, I guess we can probably stop the recording at this point.
Roger. Stopping now.
Sorry, Jim?
Stopping now.
Okay.